Hi there, BookTube. It's Rose, and I'm here to give a kind of a reviewy wrap up of William Faulkner's three novels that form the Snopes Trilogy. That's the Hamlet, the Town, and the Mansion. And I read these along with a number of other people for this year's Faulkner in August. But rather than just August this year, it was a whole summer, the summer of Snopes, because we read all three books in the trilogy. Now, before I go any further, I should thank my fellow hosts for Faulkner in August this year, which were the founders, Brian at Bookish and Alan at Big Car Books and Classics, but also Una from Codex Cantina and Greg of Another Bibliophile Reads. And a special thank you to Alan for sending me these. See this one? And this. Two lovely pictures. He's a bit of an artist amongst other things, as well as a real Faulkner aficionado, and yeah, they're pictures to sort of capture some of the atmosphere, I suppose, of the Snopes trilogy. Another thing that's been brilliant is that we've had a lovely Voxer group talking about these books, and I especially wanted to thank some of the participants in that Voxer group, particularly Andrew Sutherland and Josh Curtis and Suzanne Noel and Jim Anderson, who've all added so much to my appreciation and enjoyment of these three novels. So why is it that we put this energy into reading William Faulkner every summer? You know, how did this happen? Well, I'm not quite sure how I got drawn into it, but you know, Faulkner has a reputation for being like one of the most significant writers of American writers of the 20th century. And in particular, I think he's probably seen as the greatest or one of the greatest of writers of the American South and yeah, or southern literature, I suppose. He that's absolutely where he comes from and where he writes about. He was born in Mississippi in 1897, lived most of his life in Mississippi, died in Mississippi in 1962, and his work is generally set there. And I would say what comes through in Faulkner's books for me as a non-American is that he loves his part of America with a passion. You know, that he's positively, obsessed with Mississippi and the American South. But he's also, I don't know, kind of like despairing and disappointed about it. You know, he writes, I suppose, about the decline of the South, but he's not so stupid or so racist as to kind of set up, the old slave-owning cotton plantation sort of, period of Southern American society as some sort of golden age. You know, he's more sophisticated, more thoughtful than that, and but that kind of bit of love hate there is what creates a really interesting tension in his writing, and I think that's one of the reasons why I find him a really interesting writer to read, even if every now and then you get a sort of a little blast or something in the novels that you think, oh my goodness, what's he saying there, or what's he thinking? But he's a man, to use a cliche, he's a man of his time, and we can't always judge people by 21st century standards, but also we can judge him by mid 20th century standards for sure. But also, it's actually, he the way he thinks about and talks about sort of 19th and 20th century, Southern society, and is in itself intrinsically really interesting. He's also a writer of style and skill and drama, I suppose. One of the things that he did over his sort of body of writing is he created a sort of a fictional fictional area of Mississippi that he made his own. And that's Yoknapatawpha County. So it's not real, but it's based on, I think, Lafayette County in Mississippi. And lots of the books are set there, including the 3 books in the Snopes Trilogy. And you get kind of crossover of plots and characters and storylines and people and ideas between Faulkner's sort of body of novels. And that's another thing that adds, perhaps if you keep reading Faulkner, as I have since getting involved in Faulkner in August, adds another layer of interest and enjoyment to his work. So let's pin down the Snopes Trilogy a little bit more. So the 3 books, The Hamlet, The Town and The Mansion, were published in 1940, 1957 and 1959, respectively. Yeah, did I say that right? And we follow the rise, I guess, of the Snopes family, and specifically Flem Snopes, between, well, the book sort of starts somewhere, it's a bit unclear, but somewhere around the turn of the century, end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century, and you carried through until after the Second World War, very beginning of the 1950s. That's the sort of the time span. And so, in these books, he gets a chance to almost like kind of epitomize a period of Mississippi and Southern American sort of history and culture and politics and so on. And his very particular, as I say, slightly despairing and disappointed take on that, whilst weighted with affection. Yeah. Faulkner's known for his experimental style, I guess, and these 3 books all come after perhaps what I might see as his sort of golden period at the very end of the 1920s and into the sort of through the 1930s, when he was writing books like As I Lay Dying and The Sound and the Fury and Light in August and Absalom Absalom and so and these books are he's sort of come out the other side of that sort of period of most intense creative inspiration and experimentation, but nevertheless they do have some of those qualities that he brought to some of his earlier books of say experimental approaches, use of changing narrators and perspectives, use of sort of a stream of consciousness style some of the time, not all of the time. His characters can be quite bold and extreme. That's a kind of Faulkner characteristic. It's like he puts them, I suppose, in quite extreme situations. So you get kind of quite sensational plot developments often in Faulkner novels. Murders and death and drama, basically corruption, politics, lots of sex, not lots of sex scenes, but lots of sexual tensions and so on, and racism, and he addresses that, as well as being a sort of an unconscious racist himself to an extent. He wouldn't have thought he was, but early to mid 20th century white American man, it's not a surprise, is it? He has a superb facility for physical description of the sort of the geography the setting, the whether that's country or town, you know, yeah, it's always, it really, it comes to life, and the way he describes it, I really enjoy. He's also got a wonderful way with sort of metaphor and so on. So, you know, this is writing of often of the very, you know, best quality. He really likes to delve into the dark side of human nature, I would say. And when I talked about him having sort of rather extreme characters, that's part of that. You know, he extreme characters put in extreme situations is part of his shtick, I suppose. And you know, we get a real strong element of that in the Snopes trilogy. You know, but another side of Faulkner, which you get more of in the Snopes trilogy than perhaps I've come across in his other books, is humour. And there's elements of humour in every book, and I think that's one of his strengths as a writer. You know, that he can do that. It's not all, you know, misery and drama. You know, he always has sort of moments of lighter moments that particularly are shaped around, I suppose, a sense of the ridiculous in human behaviour, and that you particularly get in the Hamlet, also a bit in the town, less so in the mansion. The mansion is perhaps the most realist of these three books, the most ordinary, I suppose, although not in the way it sort of deals with character and plot. One of the distinctive features of the Hamlet, which a lot of people seem to enjoy, but I almost thought it's almost like cheating, I don't know, is that he takes a number of short stories that he's previously written and kind of weaves them into the novel and rewrites them as the novel, and then it's and a little bit again in the town, I think, and it makes the Hamlet a bit of an episodic kind of book. I think and so to an extent as the town, the mansion is probably the tightest in terms of kind of plotting. You know, it's a bit less meandering, perhaps. Doesn't mean it's the best book. Many people like the Hamlet best, and I can understand that why, and including, you know, many critics over the years. So, you know, because meandering is not necessarily a bad thing, is it, in literature? Yeah, depends on your taste, what flavour of novel you enjoy. All three books have chunks of brilliance, I would say, you know, moments when you're reading it and you're just thinking, wow, I love this, I love that sentence, or I love the way he's creating that story there, or that was a real surprise, or that was a real, you know, clever development. There's also chunks in all three books that dragged a bit for me. You know, there's sort of longueurs when he's, I don't know, it lost its narrative push for me, or I became, or I don't know, lost interest perhaps in the characters that he was particularly focusing on, or you know, he gets into these terribly complex things about sort of scams that people have pulled, or you know, how Flem Snopes is sort of you know, taking control of the bank, or what happens when a load of mules get there's an insurance scam over, you know, mules getting run over by the treasury. You know, something you just think, oh, we'll get on with it, you know. So it's patchier, I suppose, than his very best novels. I mean, basically, none of these would be a contender for my favourite Faulkner ever. I would say The Sound and the Fury is right up there for me. It's probably my favourite. It's in some ways, I mean, it's an experimental work of genius, basically, The Sound and the Fury, as in many ways as I Lay Dying. And Light in August is perhaps the most emotionally complex and nuanced of his books that I've read. So, you know, none of these three are up there with any of those. On the other hand, I'm really, really glad to have read them. I got a lot of, I feel like I'm an honorary resident of Yoknapatawpha County now. You know, I know all that. I can see how I can enjoy how all the different stories, you know, he brings them back and interlinks them. I can see how he was holding this amazing kind of like, I don't know, fictional society he created in his head, and that is admirable and enjoyable. But I'm even more looking forward to reading Absalom Absalom next year and next August, because I think there's a fighting chance that that one might be a book that will be up there competing with my for my Faulkner top spot. So do join us next August.